Hello and welcome to another episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon with Drake and Marie. Today we are going to do another viewers' questions episode, and we are going to be talking about hooks, scenes, and selling your book. But before we get into that, my name is Marie Mullaney, and I am a fantasy author and YouTuber. And with me, as always, is my co-host Drake.
Maxwell Alexander Drake, award-winning novelist, teach writing all over the world, all-around decent guy.
And if you like what we do here, and if you want to support us in making more of these episodes, please do hit the like button, the subscribe button, the favorites button. If your podcasting app of choice allows you to give us stars, give us 5 stars. No other star button works. If there is another option, just in case you were curious.
Yeah, because if you, just so you know, if you don't like this, it's actually a big hassle to give a negative review. They make you jump through all sorts of hoops, and it's just not fun. I mean, it's not even worth the
super inconvenient, very much an inconvenience.
So before we start, just to say, these episodes come about because you guys are asking us actual questions. It doesn't, we can't do these episodes if you guys aren't sending us questions of what you really would like to know. And some of the questions today that we're going to go over, we have gone over in other podcasts, but we're just going to go over them, in different ways or try to come at them from different angles or whatever. But some of them are some really interesting, we're going to talk about Comic-Con that someone asked. And I don't think I would ever thought about talking about the behind the scenes, what it takes to prepare for the largest convention in the United States. So if you guys have questions behind the scenes, the only thing we really won't answer are legal questions. Send us questions because, these are fun podcasts for us to do. We know that we're answering questions that at least one person wants to hear an answer to, instead of us just making up a topic that maybe no one wants to listen to. So, send questions to us. These are some of my favorite podcasts are these where we just kind of riff on 3, 4, 5 questions.
And sometimes we'll make a podcast like this, which is a couple of questions, and sometimes we'll do a whole podcast on one topic, right? Because it's a big enough topic. Okay, so I guess let's start with the questions. One of the first questions that we have is about hooks. Now, how this was sent to me in the final phrasing is, I've heard lots of people talk about needing to hook the reader. I've heard and read a number of variations of what a hook is and how to use it. And today, I was listening to one of the videos from this channel, and there was mention of several hooks being used in the scene. It seemed to me that the hooks were being layered, which blew my mind. Please help me feed my inner dragon. We are here for you. Okay, so hooks, I feel, is one of the hardest things to explain, because I found myself trying to explain it a number of times this week. On the critique circle that I'm part of, I've had a couple of places where there just wasn't a hook in the early paragraphs. Now, and it's a hard thing to explain to somebody, but a hook, the best explanation I've come up with is a hook asks the reader a question, or it makes the reader ask a question. It gives the reader something that it wants to continue reading for.
And that's the standard industry answer. And I think that answer is the reason why people are confused with it, because I don't explain it that way, and I don't teach it that way when I'm teaching it to my students and stuff. Instead of doing the whole, because the industry standard is a hook is something that's going to make the reader ask a question, and then you're like, well, how do I do that? What question am I going to draw? I think that's not the wrong way to look at it. I think that's a more confusing way, or the reason why it becomes confusing for so many people. What I teach is, and we do need to break down that there are a couple different types of hooks, and yeah, you could say they're layered. There is the thematic hook, which I think is the answer that you gave. The thematic hook is the thing that makes the reader ask a question. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, wow, should we, be less greedy in life? Or should we sacrifice ourselves for the betterment of others, or should we, like all those thematic questions. But I don't think, or at least I know I'm not smart enough to get that question asked in the first paragraph or two of the opening of the book. So for me, what I do in every scene, not just the opening of the book, but every scene, my hook is I want something that makes the reader go, oh, well, that's interesting. How does, and really the question, I guess it does ask a question, but the question is, where's this going?
Yeah.
Like, it's not a question as in, oh, let me contemplate the depths of the universe. It's a, that's interesting. Where's this going to go? And so I think if you break it down like that, where it's just, you need something at the beginning of every scene that makes the reader go, well, I wonder what's going to happen next. That's the question. What's going to happen next? Where's this going? Yeah. That's it. You don't need some world-shattering, esoterical, theoretical question of life to bubble up in the first sentence of your manuscript.
No, 100%. 100%. I agree with that. But it still is a question, right? It's a reason. Unanswered questions make the reader continue reading.
Yes.
Okay. So you've got to give the reader an unanswered question. But here's the tricky part. Here is the part that I think people miss when you give them this answer. It's got to be a question that the reader cares about answering. And there's only one way for the reader to care about the question having an answer. And that is if the character cares.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the big problem.
That's the glue.
Because I have seen people say, oh, but there's a hook, there's this mystery going on. I'm like, yes, but you just plop the mystery down in front of me like this, bleh.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no sense that the character cares. So what do I care?
Right.
Right. So your initial hook has got to be something about the character and connecting me to the character. Yes. And then it's got to be the mystery that the character also wants an answer to. 100%. Because if the character cares, then I will care.
Yeah.
And that question will then keep me reading through the chapter.
And just to take that a step further, because you're 100% right, 100% right. If not, you're 110% right, if anything else. A lot of people, because, and again, this comes back to my Drakeism I just said, the only thing that's real is the reader. A lot of people fall in love with their character. And they're like, oh, my character's so cool. And oh, I love my character so much. And oh, they're so, no, they're not. Your character is literally a tool that you use to force the reader to care about the story.
Yeah.
So getting into the mindset of understanding that everything you do to the character, as long as you connected the reader to the character, you're actually doing to the reader. Mm-hmm. So when you introduce a scene and you introduce that character, and you introduce that character in a way that the reader goes, okay, I kind of like this guy. That's one of the reasons why it is so hard. And you can pull it off. I just don't recommend you do it, in your first 10 things that you're trying to write. Get a little seasoning on the belt. But that's why it's so hard to write, some total jerk face character that everyone is going to hate. And that's the thing about reading a book. It is so easy to put a book down because you're looking at the rest of that. You're like, well, I hate this guy already on page 2. And now I've got 500 more pages to read with this guy. Yeah, no, I'm just going to put this down. So you have to understand the only thing that's real is the reader. And that doesn't just come from, they're the only ones that's being impacted by the story, but it's also the psychology of human beings. If you give me a character that just doesn't repulse me out of the gate, and you give that character something that makes you go, okay, yeah, I want to see what happens next. Because that really is it. And I guess when I was saying that earlier, I was like, there's no question. There is a question. It's not a question that you think it is. It's just this simple little, all right, what happens with this little moment in time?
So I'm in the process of writing a little urban fantasy. Because, I felt like it would be entertaining. And and one of the interesting things about that genre, because it is as fast-paced as it is, and because it is that in that mystery kind of mold, right? Your hooks need to be continuous and contiguous every single chapter, because that's how those books work, right?
Well, but I think that's with every single one of my stories.
It's not. I'm sorry, but it's not, because I've read your stories, okay, and they do not hook to the extent that those mystery novels hook.
Oh, well, if you're going to grade them,
yeah.
But every one of my chapters opens with a hook that makes you go, okay, this is interesting. I want to see what happens here.
Sure, but those are not, I mean, those are epic fantasy hooks, right? They're little character hooks. They're little, like, because you're telling a long haul story. It's a story aimed at an exploration of a world, etc., etc. Whereas in urban fantasy,
it can't be, oh my goodness, we're in an ambulance heading to the hospital at the beginning of every single chapter.
Yeah. Whereas in urban fantasy, it's you're not going to linger on the world building, right? The world building is snappy, 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 and because the mystery needs to pull you from start to end.
Right.
So your hook needs to be much more plot orientated in each chapter.
Right.
And you can't have chapters that are like a character hook, for example, or a world hook, or oh look, it's a piece of the thing that I haven't explored yet. Look at, like, rather than every freaking chapter's got to be like a metronome, must be a plot hook.
Yeah, and that's getting down to the fact of how tight your plot is, and a mystery. Those things have to be very, very tight. Whereas you get a little bit more, to steal from Doctor Who, a little bit more wibbly wimey. But in your ability to kind of explore more.
But the thing with epic fantasy is, fans who read epic fantasy are also not looking for urban fantasy. You know what I mean? They're not picking up your epic fantasy. They want the book to linger. They expect to read 200,000 words.
There's a reason why it exists.
Yeah, and that was what I was about to say. Like that is the genre differences, right?
Yeah,
because epic fantasy and you need to bear that in mind when you're writing. Like, I would never write epic fantasy with as tight a plot as I'm writing this urban fantasy,
or as we did with Magic Fall,
because Magic Fall is much more adventure fantasy YA stuff. So it's a very tight, very hard plot, very rapid fire. And I mean, it's a pretty linear story.
Which is a good thing, or we would have finished it in time.
We would never have finished it. Like, there's no way. Book 2 is going to be slower because there's going to be much more city involved.
We don't have to do it in 8 weeks.
And we're not doing it in 8 weeks, because the thing with the first book, with Magic Fall, is it was easy to do it that fast because we're going outside the city. Yeah. So there's none of we didn't need to world build the deep cultural elements of the city. We needed to world build it, but we didn't need to show the reader.
Right.
That stuff, that deep cultural elements, that's what takes time. That's why epic fantasy is so slow, because it needs to show you and ground you in the culture and the world. And that takes time. Fans of epic fantasy, fans who actually like epic fantasy, who read Brandon Sanderson, George R.R. Martin, and etc., like us in our normal haunts, want deep world building. They want to be shown. They don't mind reading 600-page books. They kind of expect that. So, and that is then your hooks. Then your hook in a character, to get back to that hook question, can be a character hook at the start. It can be oh right, this character is in this teaching situation where they've just failed at a lesson. Will they succeed this time?
Right.
That can be a perfectly acceptable hook in such a book, because it's a hook about the character, or it can be a hook about the world. Like, oh, right, so and so just stumbled into this hidden room. Like, what's going on in this hidden room? Like, is it an ancient temple to the gods? Is it
Yeah.
And that then is that hook, right? But you have to be genre and book conscious, because if you're writing like I'm doing now with this urban fantasy book, every chapter's hook is an element of the mystery.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess that is also the reason why really breaking down what a hook is a lot more complicated, because what a hook is could change depending on which genre you're in. But it can even change, even if you're in the same genre and you shifted to a different book series or whatever, or just a different standalone book, the hooks could change depending on what you're trying to accomplish with the story, how you want to impact the reader. I just think most of the time it doesn't have to be as hard. Like, so many people stress out, especially over that first chapter. They're like, no, this has to be, and it can happen. Like we edited that one book where it was on the second page that they had it, but like it was such a great sentence that actually gave you the much bigger question in the one sentence. I'm not that smart, I'll make you think it's interesting and make you want to keep reading to find out what happens next. And I'll eventually get you the world, massive question that's going to make you think, question your humanity. I'll get there. But, I'm probably not going to do it in the opening question or, the opening sentence. So I think that just takes a little stress off of me when all I'm really looking for, and I do this again, every single scene has to start this way. In the first paragraph or two, there has to be something that makes you go, oh, okay, what happens next? Like, this is interesting, because then what that means is the reader can't put the book down.
Yeah.
You've bought enough time. So by the time they get the answer to that, hopefully you've given them a bigger question, and it doesn't have to be too much, but it could just be a little bit bigger. And so that's what we mean by layering them, is like, I'm going to give you this little question of, oh, wow, he's going to be late for school. Is he going to make it to class on time? I mean, who cares? But it's still something, since whatever in the paragraph made me care about this, girl or whatever. And I find out that she might be late to class. And if she's late again, she gets expelled. Like, I don't care about this chick yet, but whatever, again, something in that paragraph made me go, okay, I connect to this person. Like, if that was the only story, if it was just the story about her making it to class on time, you're probably going to lose me. But if along the way to class, I get another question, and then I get into class and I get another question. And so now we start building, and that's what we're talking about layers.
Yeah. So it's, you don't have to buy the reader's loyalty for the whole book with the opening. You just have to buy their loyalty to read the next paragraph, and then maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs, and then to the end of the chapter, and then to turn the page to the next chapter. And that's there. I want to actually talk about the end of chapter hooks, because I've seen this as well recently on Critique Circle. People will reach the end of a section in their book, like an act in their book, or they'll reach the end of a chapter, and all conflict will be resolved and the character will be happy. And I'm like, okay, but now I don't want to continue reading the book.
Right.
Because here's the problem, right? I know as a reader that plot requires conflict. So the character that I now care about is happy.
Yeah.
If I turn the page, they're going to stop being happy. They're going to cease being happy because plot requires conflict.
Yeah.
So why am I going to turn? You've got to give me a reason to turn the page. There's got to be a promise of something either better on the next page, or there's got to be still something that's wrong, or you understand? Like, you've got to hook me at the end of the chapter to flip the page to the next chapter.
So I've never said this story publicly because we live in the same town, or we used to. He's passed now, so I guess I can say it and not worry about running into him and having him question me about this. But Terry Goodkind did that to me with the Sword of Truth series. I didn't enjoy the first book. It was passable. It was good enough that I just kept reading. But I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't like I was like, oh my goodness, I cannot wait. There was none of that. Although there was one section which we can go into later or whatever. But for the most part, it was just very humdrum. And I got to the end of the first book, and everything was resolved in this beautiful, happy little bow. And they had actually included the first couple of chapters of book 2 in my copy of the book. And I was like, nah. So I didn't even read the free couple of chapters that were already in the novel that I was already reading, because like it just didn't do enough for me to even read ones that I had already been, I purchased them. And I still didn't read it. And I never finished that series. I was done.
Be deeply, deeply grateful. Seriously.
Yeah, I've heard.
Oh,
I mean, it would have to get so much better after that first book. But yeah, so that's.
I was younger, and at that time I read a lot. I read fast. You know how you are when you're younger.
Well, this is also pre-Drake. So, I always divide the world up between pre-Drake and post-Drake. So this is back when I was just fan mentality. I knew nothing about this stuff.
And I read it. I read, I think, the first 5 books in the hope that it would get better. And I just...
Post-Drake, I don't even think I would have finished the first book.
I wouldn't finish it now. There's no way I would finish it now.
Yeah.
But the later books, oh my goodness.
Well, I didn't mean for this to turn into a bash on mankind, talking about the dead. But it's basically, my point was just to say, if you tie everything up at the end, if there's nothing that makes me go, okay, all right, I got to find out what happens next. That's why we talk about, and we're going to talk about scenes next, but the 5th part of my breakdown of a scene is hook. So I start with a hook, is part 1. And the last one is hook, because I need to hook you to make you go, crap, I can't put the book down now. I now have this question that I want an answer for, and I'm going to turn to the next chapter. But it's also why, like, Magic Fall doesn't end perfectly, because we know there's a second book coming. So we tie up that thing, but they have still other things that they're going to have to deal with, and so that's
exactly. So we leave the characters in a happy, resolved place. They have resolved the conflict of the book, but that there are still plot threads undone. There are still things calling them.
Yeah.
And that's important, because otherwise, why do people buy book 2?
Right.
So, and especially if people have fallen in love with the characters, actually, like, especially then, because they don't want those characters to get hurt, So if you leave the characters in a perfect, happy state, they're like, well, I'm not.
Now, 2 cautionary tales. Yeah. So what I was going to say was, which is why at the end of book 3 of Magic Fall, will be done, and you'll know that we're done because everything will be resolved. However, some authors feel like they have to do more than that. And I'll give you 2 cautionary tales with ending a series, in my opinion, incorrectly. And that is Wizard's First Law and the Harry Potter series. I think, the Wizard's First Law, he did it on purpose, and I think he was stupid for doing it. So the 3rd book of that series, actually, the conflict is completely resolved about a 1/3 of the way through the last book. It's over. They defeat the bad guy. They save the world. They do everything. And then the next 2/3 of that book are how the heroes go home and have their lives completely ruined. Like, there was a couple that were going to get married. They were will they, won't they through the series. And so they get home and they get married. And then they get into a fight, and she murders him and goes to jail. The guy that comes back to become king finds out that he's actually a puppet king, and he has no control. And now he's just trapped in this soulless life that he hates, but he can't get out of. Like, literally every character ends horribly. And I think that, in a way,
you're
Rowling
talking about Joe Abercrombie's First Law, right? Yeah,
Abercrombie's First Law series. Only reason why I read that series is because everyone told me that it ends in a tragedy. I'm like, there's no way. And so I had to read it just to see. I'm like, oh my goodness, it really does. That's a horrible way to end a series. But in a way, I feel like Rowling did it with Harry Potter with what, because she ended in a way, and you could tell she was like, I will never write another one of these books ever again. And so she, at the end of that 7th book, kind of went off on, here's Harry when he's 42, and like I'm done. Let me show you the future so that you don't have to bug me for this anymore. I've already made more money than literally the Catholic Church. Don't want to come back here and do this again. I'm just going to show you Harry as a 42-year-old or however old he was at the end of that. And and I think that was also wrong. So there is we do want to tie up, like Magic Fall will end in a way where it's like, because we will probably never continue that series after that. It's kind of a one shot. I mean, it was supposed to be a novella. And now it's 3 novels. That was kind of my fault. But it'll, it's going to tie up, it's going to resolve, everything's done. It'll always be open for, continue, sort of like
the world will always be open. But those characters will likely be, their story will be done.
So just be careful with the ending of it. You want to, if the story's going to continue either in the next chapter or in the next book, do not tie it up. Period. Ever.
And here's another piece of advice. Do not kill characters just for the sake of killing characters.
Yep.
Every character death needs to have a bigger impact than potentially reusing that character in the future.
Yes.
Because if you kill a character, that's it, they're gone, you cannot use them again. No matter how much fans love them, no matter what fans feeling, they're gone. That character is now gone. Okay, so their death better have such an impact that it is worth never using them again.
And if you want a great cautionary tale for that, first you have to overlook the fact that it made so much freaking money, but take a serious look at Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Those characters that are killed off in such a worthless piece of crap way. It's the reason why every fan of that series goes, oh yeah, no. I never, after just a very short time, I realized I am not going to get invested in any character. Like none. I'm just invested in the story, the whole world, but the individual characters matter not at all to me. And again, my entire philosophy of storytelling wraps around the fact that I make the reader care about the character. So if you don't care about any character that I come up with, like you've literally taken away my one magic sword that I use to slay the dragon. And so, and I did for since I was a teenager, I had always had this idea that I was going to write a story where I wantonly killed every main character for no reason through the whole thing. And then I read Feast for Crows, the first Game of Thrones series. No, that's the 4th. The Game of Thrones is the first one. Sorry. I read Game of Thrones and I was just like, wow, thanks, George, because I will never do this. This is horrible. Because you just get...
The odd thing is, I will support him in Ned's death. I will support Ned's death. I think he could have written the story without Ned's death, but Ned's death was fine. Ned's death was a gut punch. Okay.
So it was in the fact that you have this amazing character. I will agree with you on that. It was a worthless death. And with just a small tweak, it could have been actually worth something.
Yeah, 100%. But I mean, but let me explain what my bigger concern is besides the tweak around it, because we've discussed like how he could have tweaked it. But the problem is, like after Ned's death, it just everybody dies.
Right.
And that cheapens Ned's death. It makes Ned's death much less. You understand what I'm saying? Like it's the same thing as Dany being a 12-year-old girl forced into marriage. Okay. Mm-hmm. It shattered my modern sensibilities. Obviously it did. And it wasn't actually that common in the Middle Ages either. But anyway, regardless, he forces this 12-year-old girl into a marriage, and it is shocking, and it is a gut punch because I'm living through her as a 30-year-old man consummates his marriage, right? But then, like, you're in the next couple of books, suddenly there's 12-year-olds getting into bed with you understand what I'm saying? Like, it cheapens the gut punch.
Yeah.
And that is my biggest problem with what happened in the later books, is they cheapen the impact of the first book.
Yep. Yeah. It's one of the reasons why you should never double dip on plot devices. If you're going to use a plot device, use it once and don't go back to it, because you will just weaken the fact that you used it before. And it's boring. No one wants to revisit the same exact thing over and over and over again through a story.
Exactly.
But yeah, so hopefully that answers the question of layering. It's not about layering hooks. It's about this first hook. I'm going to make you go, okay, I want to see what happens next. And then I'll probably stop reading. But by the time they get the answer to that, 2 or 3 paragraphs into it, there's a little bit bigger question now. They're like, okay, well, now this is actually even more interesting, and I want to see where this goes. And eventually it's, okay, now here's a specific question that I have that I want an answer for. And I think if you think about it like that, instead of stressing out over trying to come up with a specific question in the opening line, if you just understand that it's not about this world-shattering thematic question, the opening hook of a scene, which I think we're going to talk about scenes next, is literally just, okay, all right, I want to see what happens in the next few seconds of this book, and then I'll probably stop reading. But you're not going to stop reading, because by the time you get the answer to that, I'm going to just keep building and building and building and building. So it's not necessarily layering hooks. It just buys you more time to connect the reader deeper to the character, so that you can now have bigger problems come along. And that's another thing I guess we should say that you might want to think about. Instead of thinking about it as a hook, think about it as a conflict or a problem. It's really what a hook is. A hook is a conflict or a problem that we're going to have to deal with. And so I think if you think about it like that, it might help you as well. Like, oh, so in the opening paragraph, I've got to give them a problem or a conflict that's interesting, that makes me go, okay, I want to see where this goes. Yes. And so within 3 or 4 paragraphs, I want to give a little bit bigger problem or conflict. Yes. And then on the second page, I want to give them a little bit bigger. Yes. Just if you kind of think about it like that, instead of stressing out over the word hook, because everyone knows what a problem is. Everyone knows what a conflict is. So like, think about it like that. And I think that might be an easier way for you to understand the flow of a story. And again, this is not in the opening chapter of the novel. This is in every opening of every scene. And a scene may be a whole chapter, but you may have more than one scene in a chapter. It's still the same thing. That hook, that opening conflict / problem must be there to make the reader go, all right, I'm going to give him a couple paragraphs to see where this goes.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about scene structure. And I'm wondering if we should just open one of the Magic Fall chapters and like show the progression through.
Sure. So Magic Fall is up for pre-sale. You can get it at starvingwriterstudio.com, or you can pre-order the ebook from Kindle.
Just on a note of Magic Fall does have pictures in it.
Oh yeah.
Really
we got
pretty
interior
pictures.
art as well.
Yeah.
It looks fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. So here's how I teach writing a scene. And remember, first of all, the reason why I'm using scene instead of chapter, most of my chapters are one scene long, 90% of them. I rarely do a scene break in a chapter. But the reason why I like to use scene is because these are the rules for a scene. If you have 2 scenes in a chapter, 3 scenes in a chapter, it doesn't matter. You follow these 5 steps in every scene that you write. So in scene 1 is what I call scene setting. And there's 3 things that have to happen in scene setting. You have to have a hook, which we just talked about in detail. So you understand what I mean by hook now. It's not necessarily some world crushing hook. It's just something that makes me go, that's interesting. You have to make sure the reader knows exactly whose head they're in instantly, so that they are wrapped inside the illusion of that narrative vehicle. And you must instantly wrap the reader in, where am I at? What is around me? I need to be able to see where I'm at. I need to be able to know who said I'm in, and I need to have something interesting. So that's step one. That's setting the scene is what I call that. You must then introduce the conflict of the scene. And again, this is not necessarily the conflict of your story, but there has to be a reason this scene exists that's more important than that first little hook. Now, you could use this in the opening. So the conflict of the scene could be the hook that you do during your scene setting. But I break it out separately because a lot of times it's not. A lot of times the scene starts off a little bit slower, and then we get into the actual conflict of the scene. You must have a rise in tension through that conflict of the scene. Why are we here? We're here to, make it to class on time. We're here to get into an argument with a teacher and get suspended, whatever. So you must have a rise in tension through that. The fourth is you must have an overcome. Now, it gets a little confusing with scenes because the overcome doesn't need to be resolved. It does need, so like, let's say we're just running with this. I don't know why I'm doing this whole late for school. Maybe last night I dreamed that I was running late for class, even though I haven't been in class in 40 years. So let's say that's the comp of the scene. I'm going to be late for class. If I miss one more class, or if I'm late one more time, I'm going to get suspended. The resolution might not be the suspension, but the resolution is, all right, Drake, I told you one more time, so you're out of here. Go see the principal because you're being suspended. Like, that's still resolved because now I know that Drake didn't make it to class. We don't know what's going to happen to him as far as the punishment. We didn't resolve the whole thing, but we resolved that moment. And then the fifth thing is, you must have a hook that makes me want to read the next scene. So those 5 things: scene setting, introduction of the conflict of the scene, rise in tension through the scene, through the conflict of the scene, resolution of the conflict with the scene, and then a hook to make me read the next scene.
So let's take a look at how we did it in chapter 3. And I picked chapter 3 because it's not one that we've talked about before much. So here we are. So chapter 1 of this story, which was Buri's first chapter, ended with her deciding to go to HQ because she needs some equipment, to the precinct HQ. So chapter 3 opens with the queue stretched before Buri like an undulating river of bodies. Families stood together, some talking quietly, most not talking at all, need burning in every haggard gaze and empty pocket. The line spilled right up to the edges of the concrete sidewalk, barely avoiding the sleek magnet pods barreling down the street. Tin Shah's precinct HQ towered over it all. So we know we're in Buri's head because we get that right in the first sentence. We know where we are. We have a description of the line we're standing in, and it's a reminder that, oh yes, we're here to get equipment. Okay, so then we go on to say the flat grey roof reached to just under the giant displays of the current date and time on the dome. Despite the size of the building, the precinct officers only allowed in 2 petitioners and their kin at a time. The crowd bulked the line beyond its length, and Buri estimated she was 8 spots from the front. So that is our first thing. We've got to get through the line to get into the HQ.
And also, this is a carryover. I mean, that's the other thing is that, remember, you are carrying over tension and conflict from the last scene. So we know we already have a ticking clock. We know she has 24 hours. We already have a deficit of finances. So we know that she's not going to be able to afford the equipment that she needs to survive this journey, that she's going to have to beg for free equipment from the government. So we're bringing those in, and now we've got this line in front of us. So we're like, oh man, bureaucracy. How long is it going to take? How much of her time is going to get eaten up of this 24 hours just standing in line? Is she going to get the equipment when she gets there? So to me, this does everything that I needed to do in an opening of a scene because of the fact that I know whose head I'm in, I know where I'm at, and I at least have something like, okay, all right, let's see what happens. Is she going to make it? Is there going to maybe one of the cars run somebody over? Like, because we mentioned how close and dangerous they were. And like, there's all these things like, okay, and I want to learn more. And, the other thing is you have to understand that you do have more loyalty. I mean, this is chapter 3. So if somebody has reached chapter 3, you've earned some loyalty.
Yeah.
Not everything. because they can still put the book down, but you've learned some loyalty.
So we then have the little scenes in the line, and then Buri gets recognized, right? So the child ahead of her recognizes her as Buri Zuren. And that immediately brings the whole like Nadi Fall to the surface again. And then there's another earthquake, right? Which then reminds the reader as well that, oh, right, the city's not doing well, right? So there's kind of this slowly rising tension. And then there's this guy who's also on Buri's team who goes into the HQ, and he comes out and he's got equipment. So we're like, okay, maybe she actually will get equipment. Maybe, she'll get
take the last of equipment, which is why we're being shown he's got the equipment.
Yes.
So it builds tension.
Yeah. And then, so she has this little conversation with the dude, and then finally she gets into the place. And again, there's a lot of descriptions, right? Because you're setting the scene every time, because now she's transitioning from outside to inside.
And then she goes from the ground floor to the top floor.
Yeah.
So basically what we've done here, just to kind of follow through with the 5 steps. Step 1's done. We've now introduced the bigger conflict of this, because we see one of the other Naughty Falls members coming out with an armful of equipment. That makes us start going, oh crap, did he get all the equipment? Is she going to have anything left? And because that's what is the conflict of the scene. The conflict of the scene is she needs equipment. Does she get it? Does she not? That's the conflict. And we're building that tension through it. And we're doing all sorts of other things like Marie just mentioned. We are introducing more of the world building and more of the politics and more of how the government red tape works. We're also bringing back in now in the first 2 chapters it happened as well. But here we're just doing a little city quake to remind, there's a bigger problem than just getting equipment that's going on here. So we're building the tension, we're building world building, we're doing all these things we have to do, but we're also rising up through the conflict of this chapter.
So here we come and we're at the desk, right? So Buri's made it all the way through, and she's now at the desk. And she says, I'm Buri Zuren. She rolled back her cuff to show her ident sleeve. I was wondering if the precinct can help me with a list of gear for the Nutty Fall race. Yeah, some. The DO leaned on the plastic counter and tapped it to bring up the holo display. What you need? Well, everything. Heat rushed to Buri's face. Whatever I can get. Right. He scrolled through the list. I got rations, water cleaners, fire blanket, and rope. Buri gripped the edge of the counter as her breath ran short. What about a respirator? Nope. Gave the last one out not 10 minutes ago. And that's our callback, obviously, to the teammate walking out with a respirator.
We've also already set the fact that she can't survive outside of the city without a respirator. So we already know why this respirator is important to our girl here.
So then she says, but you have to have one. And he says, we would have, but on the last maintenance job, the team didn't come back, so we lost all their gear. The one I gave Shilon was older than the dome, so I wouldn't be too jealous. He shrugged. Sorry. You want the rest of it? Yes. Buri folded her arms on the counter and leaned her head on them. Heavy footfalls led away from her. No respirator, no rad tent. 67 cryptids, and she still needed to get enough food for Teacup to stay safe. So then she starts running through options and ideas.
So I wonder, this is a side note from these things that we're talking about, but we also have been talking, no, don't scroll any further than that. Right there. We also have done different things on people that ask, well, how do you world build organically? This is such a beautiful line of organic world building that I think a lot of people are not even going to even fall into it. But if we look at line 153, where the guy behind the counter says, we would have, but on the last maintenance job, the team didn't come back. So we lost all their gear. He says it, this does several things. One, he says it in such a cavalier way that we start realizing that human life in this world that these characters live in don't have much value. He's actually more concerned that they lost gear than they lost the human lives that were down there with the gear. It also builds that, wow, these people are really poor because they only had that equipment. Like, and once it was gone, it's gone. And it also builds how freaking dangerous the planet is without even talking about how dangerous the planet is. Like, a whole team of people died. So in one piece of dialogue, we do a bunch of stuff that the readers are going to organically consume. They may not think about it, but it is absolutely going to stick with them and impact them. However, we didn't info dump anything. And so, like, that line right there is one of the best organic world building lines. It's not even in narration. I mean, this is what we're talking about when we're saying you have to world build organically. You look for ways that organically give information to the reader without giving the reader information, just straight out. So I just want to take that side note because it was such a great line. And Marie wrote that line. Credit where credit is due.
Here we get the no answer. Okay, so then Buri pushes and she's like, okay, can I see the captain? Right, because now she's just talking to the desk officer, right? So the dude phones through, and now we're sitting with the hook of like, will the captain help her? Because now, we're worried. Buri's worried, so the reader's worried, right? Because the reader's attached to Buri. So the DO says, yes, okay, she'll see you, go up to the 18th floor. So off she goes. Now, the elevator itself is also not doing well. It's like the shuddering thing. It doesn't open all the way up the doors and so on. So you get it's a continuous build on like it's poor. And then finally we get to Captain Nulang, who, Buri then asks here for this. The captain leaned back, crossing her boots over one another. The yellow-winged serpent of Tin Shah stretched out as she put her hands behind her head, pushing her black hair forward. I hear you, but the precinct doesn't have cash to buy equipment. That's what the DO said, but anything would help, ma'am. Even just a name where I could get a rad tent or respirator. Quillan's eyes drifted from Buri's crown to her heels. Your sister got rad sick on a farm chipping, that right? Yes, ma'am, 2 months ago. How did you know? It's my business to know. Care has to be eating your savings. It is, ma'am. Buri bit the inside of her cheek. Is she wasting my time? You know what happens to the precinct? So then there's a little bit here about like why the captain is considering helping her, right? Which is like basically it's a political gift.
Yeah, we learn her motivation because that's the other thing that I think a lot of people miss.
Yeah.
And it's something that I work with, like the two authors that are working with me on The Realm. One of the conversations that I probably have the most with them, because they're fantastic writers, but we'll get it. They'll have a tertiary character, and I'm like, I don't understand what this tertiary character's motivation is. I mean, I know what it is because I'm the one who plotted the story. And they're like, well, I mean, he's just a tertiary. I'm like, no, he's the hero of his story. He has a reason. Why is he doing this? That needs to come through. And so that's what you do here is you actually get to go, oh, okay, so she's helping only because it helps or it has a chance of helping her. She's not just a plot device to give the next thing to the character. She is the hero of her story. She is a living, breathing entity. She has desires and motivations and cares and concerns and phobias and prejudices and everything like that. And obviously you can't give all of that with a tertiary character. This captain is in, I think she's only in this one scene.
Yes, correct.
So like, we're not going to do this entire workup, but we're still going to run that character as if they were the hero and they're trying to accomplish something. Yes. And you have to do that. If you want your tertiary and secondary characters to really leap off the page, you need, every time you're running them, you need to understand why they're doing what they're doing. What is their motivation for doing what they're doing? And I think if you answer that question every time, you will understand how to run that character through that scene.
It's also important here because what ends up happening, what the resolution of the scene is, and where the conflict is resolved, is the captain offers Buri her own personal rad tent, right? So she still doesn't have a respirator. That conflict is unresolved, but she does at least have one piece of equipment. So it's important that there's a strong reason for the captain to do this, because it is like, it's not like she's giving her bureaucracy funding. She's giving her actual, funding out of her personal gear. And then our hook into the next chapter, Huri gets phoned by her sister, who she needs to go and see. And she's like, maybe Carly will have an idea.
Yeah. So the hook is, the last line of this chapter is, the builder helped me. I need a plan. Yeah. So the question is, oh, yeah. So how is she going to figure this out? I'm going to keep reading just to figure that out. Obviously she's going to, but I want to see how it happens. So let me keep reading. And so again, not an earth shattering, like, world destroying hooks. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for the hook that makes the reader turn the page.
Yes.
That's what we're doing. And so there's your 5. We had a great setup. We had a question that we wanted answers to. We knew whose head we were in. We knew where we were at. We had to rise through that. We also then introduced the actual conflict of this chapter. Why does this scene exist? The conflict of this chapter is she's going to go against bureaucracy to get what she needs. We're going to have a rise in tension through that and build. It's like, oh, she's going to get it. No, she's not. Oh, wait, maybe. Oh, no, she's not. We have a resolution of that conflict. I got some of what I needed. I didn't get everything that I needed. And then we have a hook of, well, crap. Now what do I do next?
Yeah.
That's going to make me want to read the next chapter to find out what she does next. Yes. So are any of them earth shattering? I mean, this is the beginning of the story. So no, they're not. But are they all absolutely what the reader needs at that moment to want to continue reading? I think so. I mean, it's subjective. So, someone out there is going to be like, nope, but that's fine. It's the way this works. Yeah. So that's a scene, and that's a beautiful scene.
So I thought it would just work well as an example. It's got all the things.
Hopefully that answered your question of both, because we also saw some layering in of the, that hook, and the hook gets bigger and bigger. We get the hook of, are we even going to get inside? And then we have the hook of, oh, wow, this guy got a bunch of equipment, but that probably means that she's not going to, because no reader is going to be like, oh, yeah, no, they've got, obviously he's got equipment, so they've got plenty of equipment in it. No, readers going to be like, oh, that's definitely foreshadowing that he got the last of something, which he did. Not trying to be, again, it's not about reinventing the wheel. Yeah. We then get the hook of, no, I don't have everything. We then get the hook of, I want to speak to your boss. Maybe, maybe not. Then we have the hook of, is it going to happen? And then we have the hook of, well, now, crap, I got this much, but where am I going to get across that finish line? So if you want to call that layered hooks, which I never thought about it like that until the person asked the question, you could look at it that way. But that's a scene, and you're driving through. If you keep those 5 points in mind, set the scene, set a conflict of the scene. Again, it's not of the story, it's of the scene. Rise in tension through that conflict, resolve that conflict. It doesn't have to be all the way, but it has to have some type of resolution, and then set a hook for the next scene. That's it. It's not that difficult. If you miss any of those, though, I think the scene sucks. I think the scene is broken if it doesn't do all 5 of those things.
And then I guess last, let's talk about Comic-Con and our preparations for it and kind of the behind the scenes stuff. So let me start with, for me, the preparations are somewhat different.
Yes.
Because I have to get my ass
to the other side of the planet.
Across the Atlantic Ocean and to America. So for me, obviously, the process has involved flights and visas and all of those wonderful things involved in international travel. But on the other hand, the majority, I would say, of our preparations have gone into getting stock. And I mean, the writing was part of that, right? So let's assume you have books to sell at Comic-Con. Let's assume that part's done.
Well, I mean, so as much work as you have had to do on all this, you have almost a free ride, because the hard part, I mean, if you got to travel, you got to travel, and that's traveling. I don't care if you were traveling to Sweden or Germany or London or Las Vegas. Travel is travel. But you didn't have to do any of the actual work to actually make. I mean, it's an entire machine. Now, I've been doing this for 20 years, so my machine is in pretty good shape. But and before the shutdown and before cancer, I was doing about 25 to 30 conventions a year. I only did, I think, 3 last year. I'm only doing 4 this year. You know, I'm still in building mode. I want to have more time to create and write. And it's the reason why I'm going to get 6, novels out this year, because I'm not on the road 110 days out of the year, which is what I normally am on the road. But you got to market. I mean, you got to get out there and you got to shake babies and kiss hands. There's just no other way there's so much noise that being in a spot that has a lot of fans congregate in one area that you can physically get to meet. We are still, one of the things about humans is we will still gravitate to people that we like personally. So when they see me on stage talking, they're like, wow, this guy's funny and he's got cool things to say. And then he come to my booth and I'm all about them and I'm all about, I am so excited to meet you. And that's not a joke, or that's not an act. I love my fans and I love, people that are interested in what I'm interested in. So it's not like I'm faking it when I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so excited to meet you. I actually am excited to meet you. But let's do the behind the scenes. And I guess Comic-Con is the one that would be kind of good for this because of the fact that there is no other convention that requires more prep work than Comic-Con, because it is the largest fan convention in the United States. And when I say Comic-Con, first of all, the word Comic-Con is like hamburger. Like if you just said, well, I'm gonna go to a hamburger joint, that could mean anything. Comic-Con is the same thing. There's a Comic-Con every weekend in the United States, every weekend. 52 weeks a year, there's a Comic-Con happening. Now, some of those are 100-person Comic-Con in bumfrick, Idaho, that literally only the people of that 2,000-person town have ever even heard of. But when the majority of us say Comic-Con, we mean San Diego Comic-Con, which can be up to like 350,000 people shoved into this one spot. And that causes some logistical issues. If you don't book your hotel by November, you are probably not going to get a hotel. Now, I have a guy who has rental houses that I've been renting at for several years. So it is really nice because not only does he give me a good price because I'm a guaranteed every year customer, but it's also just nice to deal with an individual as opposed to some soulless corporation. I always, I rent the same house now for the last several years. So we know the layout of the land. We know everything about what we're going to deal with and everything like that. So that makes it really nice. But still, you have to deal with housing. Housing is one of the hardest things at these biggest conventions. When you are either a vendor of the convention or an invited guest, which I'm both at Comic-Con, you actually get free access to it. So if I didn't have a guy for housing, like at Gen Con, I don't have a guy, but because I am a vendor there, I get free access to guaranteed hotels before they're open up to the fans. The thing you have to worry about is you have to get them. Like if you put it off for a day, that pool is gone. And now you're just thrown in with the rest of the unwashed masses and trying to get a room. And I can't tell. Now, that's the nice thing is that's one of the reasons why I have a booth at Comic-Con or at Gen Con, because the booth is $450 or whatever, but the discount that I get on hotels is about $450. So it's almost basically like getting it for free if I was just going to buy a hotel room there anyway. And I get advanced access to it before the fans. And so I always get a room, and it's always in the hotel that's connected to the convention center. So I literally don't have to go outside. I can just go across the catwalk. So understanding stuff like that. But again, you have to be an exhibitor. And to be an exhibitor, like Comic-Con has about a 6 or 7 year waiting list to get an exhibitor booth. So there's all sorts of things to think about like that. Another thing you have to think about is parking. So like I just bought my parking passes for Comic-Con. I always park underneath the convention center because I carry all my stock and I have them in the vans. And so having them right below the convention center and not 3 miles away where you have to carry boxes of books for 3 miles across, through crowds. But they go on sale. Like I set an alarm. They went on sale Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. And I had an alarm set at 9 o'clock, at 9:30, at 9:45, at 9:55, just to make sure. I'm like, when that link goes live, I'm clicking on it, purchasing my passes, because they go fast too. Because there's, obviously it's only vendors that get access to it, but they go by the end of the day, all the parking spots are gone that are under the convention center. You can still get under a couple of the hotels that are near the convention center, but I want to park underneath the convention center. So I'm very focused on that. Things have to be approved. I give away marketing material and stuff like that. That has to be produced and turned in ahead of time to be produced. You have to worry about badges and where do you get badges, and then you have to deal with the marketing material that you're going to be dealing with. What about banners? What about giveaways? What about, and we're not even talking about stock here. Obviously you have to have stock to sell too. So the logistics of it, and for me, Comic-Con is easier because it's only, 5-hour drive away. So we can pretty much set here in Vegas and drive down there. But like 2 weeks later, I'm in Indianapolis. So it would be shipping, all the stock out there. Now I've got a guy out there that so I call it my Indianapolis warehouse. It's really just a friend of mine's basement. And I say friend, he started off as a fan and then ended up becoming a friend. But because he lives there, I'm like, hey, so can I just have a bunch of books just in your basement? And it's nice because I show up a day early. He picks me up from the airport. I stay with him the night before, so we get that visit time. And then we drive to the convention hall where he drops me off and all that. And then he's at the convention the whole thing because I get him. Obviously my perk to him is I get him one of my badges, so he gets in for free. He can stay with me at the hotel. Obviously I'm paying that side of things for him. And then obviously he helps me tear down. We go back to his house. I stay at his house for the last night. And then the next day he takes me to the airport. So it's nice to have a guy, but I did Gen Con for years without a guy. In the beginning, when I was poor, I would drive out there. It's a 3-day trip. So I would drive for 3 days. I would get there on the third day. I would, have my van and have all my stock in my van. And then I would drive, in and do the setup and everything like that. And then unload and drive back for 3 days. When I got a little bit more money, I probably couldn't have done it without the guy. By that point, his name is Buzz and I love him to death. By that point, I had Buzz in my hip pocket. So I was able to ship all my stuff to him and just let him keep it there. Or really, I didn't even ship it to him. I just left it there 1 year instead of taking it home. And then it was much easier to fly out there because the big expense is going to be the shipping, shipping
3 days.
Books. 2 days. Sorry, 2 days. It's about 23-hour drive. So it's 2 days. Sorry. Yeah, I would drive from here to Denver, Colorado. I'd stay in Denver, Colorado. And then, yeah, Denver is another 12 hours or 11 hours.
Because I could drive to Italy in 3 days.
Yeah, you don't realize how big this country is.
No, I do, but
that's not all the way across. That's a 12-hour driving day to Denver. Maybe it's 11 hours to Denver and 12 hours to Indianapolis from there, but it's 23 hours total. And those are straight shots. I'm going straight to Denver and then straight across the country because the highway from Denver because you're driving through Kansas and all of that, which is just flat and straight. Like there's nothing. So yeah, there's not even like going in weird directions or anything like that. It is a straight shot pretty much from Vegas to there. And it's 2 days. Sorry, I said 3, but it's 2 days. It's 3 days all the way to the East Coast from here.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, so you've got all the logistics, you've got hotel, obviously you're gonna have to worry about food while you're there and everything like that. And we've got it down. One of the reasons why I like staying at the house, and there's just a little more things that we've worked out. I don't do it at Gen Con, but since my wife goes to Comic-Con with me and we rent the house, we have, sandwich stuff and everything like that. So like when we go into the convention hall for the day, we eat at the booth because we bring a lunch pail and we make sandwiches and have snacks and everything like that. And we have an entire backpack full of water for the day. So I never even have to leave the booth, and my booth is right next to the bathroom. So like I've got that right there. So yeah, once I go in, I'm working until it closes. But there's a lot of this has been years of trying to figure out the best way to do this, and every convention is a little different.
My advice to a starting author would be to find a smaller convention than San Diego Comic-Con and do some selling at a smaller convention first. Also, the booths will be cheaper.
Yes.
Because the Comic-Con booths are going to be like, I have landed with my ass in the butter, as we'll say in Finland. I don't know if you guys have that expression. Because I'm friends with you, because we've been doing this podcast, we've written the book together, etc., right? But if I was doing this on my own, I would hit a way smaller convention. I'd hit the one in Bumfrick, Idaho.
Yeah. But this is how stupid I am. So before my first book came out in 2008, I was talking to the publisher and I was like, well, what are we going to do about marketing? And they're a small press. They're even out of business now. So I was like, what are we going to do for marketing? And they were like, well, I mean, you're kind of on your own for marketing. We don't have that kind of budget. We're a small press. We're going to print your book basically. And that was it. And I'm like, well, what about San Diego Comic-Con? It's coming up here soon. And they literally laughed at me. They were literally like, oh, that is so funny. So the very first convention I ever did was San Diego Comic-Con. Literally, I hadn't even done a convention as a fan. I'd always wanted to go to Gen Con, but I was never able to pull it off. So the first convention I ever did, both as a fan and a professional, was San Diego Comic-Con. And yes, it was the worst experience of my life. Not understanding parking, not understanding hotel, not understanding logistics, not understanding shipping, not understanding just the mechanics of booth setup and just, oh my goodness, it was just a nightmare in how horrible it was. It wasn't my worst year there, but it was the second worst year there. The worst was 4 years into it. I'd been there for 3 years, and it's expensive. Even though I was being invited, I wasn't speaking. I was trying to get them to give me a panel so I could teach, but it still was just me. So they were inviting me as a professional, so I got a free badge. But I didn't have a booth, so I had to, like the first 2 years, I was in a Magic the Gathering booth. But the fourth year, I had decided, because I was spending between 10 and 12 grand, because I have assistants and I have there's 9 people going with us, including you. There's 9 of us going this year. Now I'm going a little heavy. There's actually somebody coming to be a videographer. So we're doing a whole bunch of big things. But I was spending 10 to 12 grand in the beginning. And so the fourth year, I had decided not to go. I hadn't, didn't have a booth or anything like that. And I just decided it's just too much, too expensive. And literally 3 weeks before the event. And again, if you don't get a hotel in November, you don't get a hotel. 3 weeks before the event, Comic-Con called me up and said, hey, I know you've been trying to teach here for a while. We actually had somebody cancel last minute. If you want the room, you can have it. And so I was like, yes. That was the worst nightmare year, because we ended up parking about 4 miles from the convention hall and carrying stock in. Probably not that far. It was probably only like 4 blocks, but when you're carrying hardback,
like 4 miles.
Right, it felt like 4 miles, especially in July in Southern California. So like, oh my God, that was the worst. It was the absolute worst nightmare. But it is the reason why I've been invited back to Comic-Con every year since that year to speak. And this will be my 15th year speaking there. If I had said no, so there's another lesson for you. No is the worst answer you can give for your career. I mean, that was a nightmare year. It was suffering me and my wife, and actually my two close friends came in that year too. They wanted to go to Comic-Con since we were going. And we all suffered. Like, it was just torture from start to finish. Because the free booth they gave me, the free booth they gave me was like a little 1.5-foot booth. And like, it was just, there was nothing fun about that year.
So I just want to say something on that topic of saying no. Like, when I finished Hidden Blade, I started looking around for some authors who'd be willing to read it and blurb the back of it, and I reached out to a couple of authors. Now I had started the YouTube channel in order to kind of build a marketing base for the books. And so I invited a couple of authors to come to an interview, and there were 2 who responded, you and James Sutter. And out of that initial interview came this relationship with you now. So I just also want to say to anybody listening out there, like, reach out to people, like get some reason why these people would want to interact with you, and reach out to them, because the worst they can say is no. But if they say yes, you might end up in a great relationship where you write a book together and, fly 15,000 miles to attend San Diego Comic-Con as a Finn, where I'm going to sweat like a pig.
Yes. Yes, you will.
None of those will happen if you don't ask, and none of that will happen if you say no.
Right. It's from both sides. So not only did you have the cojones to just, I don't know any of these people, I'm going to keep reaching out to them, but I still don't know who it was. Who was the Australian that
Liz Allen?
I don't know if I meet so many people, the name is just not registering for me.
I don't think he knows you very well. He just said to me, why don't you try Maxwell Alexander Drake? He's at all the conventions and he's an author. I was like, okay, sure.
Yeah.
Les actually introduced me to James, which is, I think, why James gave me an interview. Like, he gave me an email introduction. But for you, he was just like, just reach out to him. He's friendly. He talks to everyone.
You just cold called me.
Yeah, I did. I absolutely did.
And so, that's the biggest advice I think both me and you can give to people that are out there. You have to do more than just have a website and have a Facebook page and have a Twitter account.
That being said, there are people with hundreds of thousands of Facebook followers, and they put out content every day on Facebook, and that is building your platform.
Right.
100%.
See, that's the difference. The only reason why I have been as successful, and I say I have been as successful with Releasing Your Inner Dragon, is because of you. Like, it's on my calendar every day or every week. And so I know I have to do it. I'm terrible at this stuff. I've been
running my YouTube channel now since 2021.
Mm-hmm.
I have, with religious intent, on a schedule of a metronome, released a video a week on fantasy world building.
Yeah.
And the podcast.
And
the only time we missed the podcast was that 1 month. And if you want to build a social media presence, that was due to cancer. If you want to build a social media presence, like a metronome, you have to release content. And it depending on which platform you're on is how much content, how often. I picked YouTube because I figured I can do a video a week. If you're on Facebook, you've got to do a post a day minimum, probably more than that.
The reason why my social marketing has always sucked is because my personality type, like if I was trying to do this podcast, it would have failed the second week. I would have gone, I would have been like, yes, I'm really excited to do this. And I would have done 1, probably 2, and then I would have never done another one again. Literally, the only reason why Releasing Your Inner Dragon exists is because of you. Like, it's it. You are the only reason. But I told you that. That was another thing, is I also know my limitations. I know how my brain works.
But yeah, so for in terms of your social media marketing, like religious, you've got to churn content on that platform on the schedule that works for that platform's algorithm.
Yeah.
There is no other way around it. You can bitch about it, you can whine about it, you can cry about it, but it is what it is. Like,
or just find a really awesome Marie.
well, you're gonna have to pay somebody like me in Comic-Con passes and
But that I have. So
and that's why we work.
yes. No, it's a great mutual relationship. This has been one of the best business relationships that have come along in my career. So
me too.
So yeah, it's being open.
Like, what you do have to consider when you're saying yes to something is you are automatically saying no to other things, because a day has 24 hours.
Yeah.
So if you say,
or you can just be like me and just work 7 days a week, 16 hours a day.
Yeah, but I mean, even so, you know what I mean? Like, you didn't get through all the things you wanted to get through. And yes, there were other things as well, like, you know, your other Rome authors and so on. But imagine if they had written those books.
I'd have gotten it done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they, like I said, it led to, that's the other thing is don't look at problems as problems. It led to solutions that I think are better. And we're being cryptic here because this is something that I haven't announced yet. But because of the failure, I think it's led now to a solution that I think is actually better than what I would have originally done had I had it my way. So that's the other thing is that, there's that joke of replace in everything you do, replace the word problem with opportunity. And that's when I go, okay, so I have this really serious drinking opportunity.
I've got a better one for you. So one of my friends had heard that expression and they were like, I think we should replace the word with crotch fairy. The word problem with crotch fairy.
I've got a drinking crotch fairy.
Got a drinking crotch fairy.
But no, it doesn't work in everything. But yeah, seriously, problems are opportunities.
So I'm not, I guess as everybody knows, I'm not religious. In fact, I'm flat atheist. But I do read a lot of like the Greek philosophers and so on. And I particularly do like some of the principles of the Stoic philosophy. Now, I don't buy into like everything, because some of it is, 3,000 years old and has about as much relevance to our lives as, right? But there are some core things there. And I think one of the most important core things out of the Stoic philosophy is you cannot control events. Events happen. The only thing that you can control is your emotional response to the event. And if you can make your emotional response not be negative, you will get through the event better.
Well, there's a better way to say that. I can't remember which one of them said it. But he basically said, if you stress about something that you're going to go through, you're only doubling the time that you're in stress.
Yeah.
Like if you got to have surgery in 2 weeks, and that's going to be, painful and everything else. If you spend 2 weeks stressing over it and hurting yourself over it, you literally have doubled your pain, instead of just going, yeah, that's going to happen. There's nothing I can do to stop that, but I'm not going to be in pain until I'm in pain. Like I am a Stoic, and here's as political as we'll probably ever get on this show, because I will say one thing political, because this is actually the answer to, and this isn't Stoicism, but this is the answer to the world's political problems. If you, because it's what you said about Stoicism, that you don't believe in all of it, that you do believe in some of it. Think about whatever, if you're on a political side of the aisle, if you're a religious person, if you're whatever, this is fact. This is the most prophetic thing you'll ever hear Drake say. if you align 100% with any ideology, you don't actually believe in that ideology. You're just brainwashed into it. Mm. No human will ever 100% align with anything. So if you are 100% aligned with your political party, with your religion, with whatever, then I would seriously take a step back and question that, because you probably are just brainwashed instead of actually believing.
Unless you're the leader of the cult, in which case, obviously, you're 100% aligned with you.
Right, because it's your idea. But yeah, I mean, that if the world would act like that, if the world would go, I mean, I lean this way, or I believe in this, but yeah, there's some things that I don't agree with, and it's fine. It's fine to not agree. But that is, I think, the downfall of the human race right now, is that people are now literally just joining a camp, and they feel like they must be 100% of that camp to be in the camp, and that's wrong. So that's my one prophetic piece of advice to the human race. Stop following and start thinking. So yeah, I'm a Stoic. I do follow that philosophy. But there are some things that I'm like, no, I don't agree with that aspect of it. And I'm not going to do that because I think that's silly. But this other stuff, I'm like, yes, no, I like, it makes sense to me when you're like, why would you suffer for 2 extra weeks when you're already going to be in pain in 2 weeks from now? I'm like, yeah, that makes sense to me. Like, I really shouldn't suffer for these 2 weeks up to that point. Yeah. So again, if I agree with it, then and not that everybody should agree with that either. Some people are like, no, I don't agree with that. I think you should suffer for the 2 weeks. It'll prepare you for it. Okay, great. Like, if that's what you believe, that's what you believe. I'm perfectly fine with that. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. We've gone way off the topic.
Yep. And I think that is a good note to end this podcast. If you want us to answer your questions, comment down below, send us an email, do all those good things. And otherwise, we will see you soon for another episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon.
Bye.